You stand in the dim light of a monastic scriptorium, somewhere in the cold stone belly of 10th century Europe. The air smells of wet parchment and tallow smoke, a combination that sits in the back of your throat like a question you're afraid to ask. Outside, beyond walls thick enough to muffle screams, the world is a patchwork of mud, violence, and kingdoms too weak to hold themselves together. Here, in this stillness, a weapon is being born, not in the forge, but in the quiet conspiracy of necessity. The crossbow is not new. It is ancient, older than Rome, whispered about in Chinese texts and Greek tragedies. But here, now, in the fractured heartland of Christendom, it is being reborn. You watch as a craftsman lays a wooden stock across his knees, carving with hands that have seen war and want. The bow is horizontal, the string taut, the trigger crude but effective. This is not a weapon of honor. It requires no years of training, no noble bloodline, no muscle built from childhood. A peasant can kill a knight with this. A boy can murder a king. The church will call it sinful. Popes will ban it. Lords will fear it. And yet, it will spread like fever, like fire, like the silent promise that the weak might finally, terribly, become dangerous. The wood shavings curl at your feet, and you notice how they catch the candlelight, small, delicate things in a room where something brutal is taking shape. The craftsman does not look up. His face is weathered, creased with lines that speak of too many winters and not enough bread. His fingers move with a certainty that has nothing to do with joy and everything to do with survival. This is not art. This is necessity wearing the skin of craft. The stock is rough beneath his hands, ash or oak, something that will not split when the string releases its terrible energy. The bow itself, the prod, they will call it, is made of wood or horn or steel, depending on how much coin someone has and how much death they need to purchase. The string is hemp or sinew, twisted tight, ready to hold the weight of violence. You can hear it creak as he tests the tension, a sound like old bones settling. It is almost ready. Almost complete. And when it is, when this thing leaves this room and enters the world, it will not care about the hands that hold it or the bodies it pierces. It will simply do what it was made to do. The scriptorium is silent except for the scrape of his knife against wood. Outside, you can hear the wind moving through bare trees, the distant sound of bells from a church you cannot see. This is a world held together by prayer and violence, by the belief that God ordained some men to rule and others to serve, and that this order is as natural and unchangeable as the seasons. The crossbow will prove that belief a lie. Not immediately. Not obviously. But slowly, inevitably, the way water wears down stone. You watch the craftsman work, and you understand that he is not just making a weapon. He is making a question. A challenge. A possibility. The possibility that a man with no name, no land, no title, might look across a field at a lord who owns him and his children's children, and instead of bowing, instead of accepting the inevitability of his own powerlessness, he might raise this wooden thing, pull this trigger, and send that lord tumbling from his horse into the mud where he belongs. That possibility, once planted, cannot be uprooted. It will grow in the dark places of Europe, in workshops and barracks and the desperate calculations of men who have nothing left to lose. You grip the crossbow in your calloused hands, feel the roughness of ash wood against your palm, the cold bite of iron in the mechanism. It is heavier than you thought. Not the weight of the weapon itself, but the weight of what it means. You are a footman, a nobody, a man whose name will be forgotten before your body cools. And yet, you hold in your arms the ability to end a life from a distance that keeps you safe. The knight across the field does not know you. He cannot see your face beneath your hood, cannot smell the fierce sweat soaking through your tunic. He sits astride his warhorse, encased in steel that cost more than your village earns in a decade. His lineage stretches back through blood and conquest. Yours ends with your father, a serf who died coughing in a field. You pull the trigger. The bolt flies. It is not elegant. It does not arc like an arrow. It punches forward, straight and brutal, and it does not care about honor. It pierces the joint in his armor, the place where metal meets meat, and he falls. Slowly. Almost gracefully. You do not feel triumph. You feel the dull, nauseating certainty that the world has shifted, that something fundamental has cracked, and there is no going back. The knight makes a sound as he falls, something between a gasp and a sigh, and you realize it is the first time you have heard him as human. Before, he was steel and horse and banner, a symbol of everything you were not. Now he is a man bleeding into the dirt, and you are the one who put him there. Your hands shake. Not from fear, you are too numb for that, but from the sudden understanding that this changes everything. The nobles have built their world on the idea that violence belongs to them, that war is the birthright of men who can afford armor and horses and years of training. You have just proven that idea a lie. The crossbow does not care about your birth. It does not care that you learned to use it in an afternoon, that your grandfather was a peasant and his grandfather before him. It cares only that you can crank the string and pull the trigger. And that, it turns out, is enough. Enough to kill a man who thought himself untouchable. Enough to crack the foundations of the world. You lower the weapon, and it feels heavier now, as if it has absorbed the weight of what you have done. Somewhere, a lord is realizing that his armor is not enough. Somewhere, a king is learning to be afraid. The other footmen around you are silent. They have seen what you did, and they understand it the way you understand it, not as victory, but as revelation. The knight's horse stands nearby, confused, waiting for a rider who will never mount again. His banner lies in the mud, the bright colors already dulling in the rain. You want to feel something, pride, maybe, or the satisfaction of revenge for every injustice your family has suffered under men like him. But you feel only emptiness, and a strange kind of vertigo, as if the ground beneath your feet has tilted and you are sliding towards something you cannot see. The sergeant is shouting orders now, telling you to reload, to find another target, to keep fighting because the battle is not over. But you know better. The battle is over. It ended the moment that bolt left your crossbow and found its mark. Everything after this is just momentum, the world catching up to what has already happened. You crank the string again, feel the mechanism click into place, load another bolt. Your hands move automatically, and you realize that you have already become what the weapon needs you to be, efficient, mechanical, deadly. A tool serving a tool. The Second Lateran Council convenes in the year 1139, and you are nowhere near it. You are in a field somewhere, or a dungeon, or perhaps already dead. But the men in their holy robes, gathered in the suffocating incense-thick halls of Rome, are talking about you. Or rather, about the thing you carry. Pope Innocent II, a man who has never held a sword, who has never felt the cold slap of rain on a battlefield, who has never watched a friend bleed out in the mud, declares the crossbow unfit for Christian warfare. It is, he says, hateful to God. Too deadly. Too cruel. It is banned, forbidden against other Christians, though permissible, he notes with a peculiar sort of mercy, against infidels and heretics. The irony is not lost on anyone. This is a weapon so effective, so democratizing in its lethality, that it threatens the very architecture of feudal power. A knight is an investment. Years of training. Expensive armor. A warhorse bred for battle. A crossbowman is cheap. Replaceable. And equally deadly. The church fears what you represent, the collapse of order, the erosion of the God-given hierarchy that keeps peasants in fields and lords in castles. But the ban is a joke. A whisper against a storm. Because wars are not fought by theologians, and survival does not care about sin. The bishops nod solemnly, as if they have accomplished something. They have written words on parchment, words that will be copied and distributed and largely ignored. Because out there, beyond the marble halls and the stained glass and the certainty of men who eat well every day, the world is hungry. The world is violent. The world is full of lords who need soldiers and soldiers who need weapons and weapons that work. The crossbow works. That is its sin. That is its virtue. It turns peasants into killers, and killers do not care about papal decrees. You imagine the scene, these holy men, soft-handed and righteous, declaring that a tool is too cruel for Christians to use against each other, as if cruelty ever needed a tool, as if the sword and the mace and the lance were instruments of mercy. As if war was ever anything but the organized application of suffering. They permit the crossbow against infidels, which tells you everything you need to know about their God. He has favorites. He has rules that bend depending on who is dying. You would laugh if you were not so tired. Instead, you crank the string and load another bolt, because the enemy does not care what the Pope thinks, and neither do you. The decree spreads through Europe like a rumor, carried by monks and priests and bishops who believe, genuinely, that words on parchment can stop the momentum of history. In some places, lords make a show of compliance, gathering their crossbows and burning them in public ceremonies, solemn affairs where everyone pretends that this matters, that this will change anything. And then, quietly, in workshops hidden from church eyes, new crossbows are made. Better ones. Stronger ones. Because the lords who burn their weapons in public are the same lords who lie awake at night, terrified of their neighbors, of rival kingdoms, of the possibility that they will be caught without the means to defend what they have stolen and called inheritance. The church can ban the crossbow, but it cannot ban fear. It cannot ban ambition. It cannot ban the cold mathematics of survival that says you use whatever works, and you apologize to God later, if there is time. The ban becomes a joke told in taverns, a source of bitter laughter among soldiers who understand that holiness is a luxury afforded to men who do not have to fight. You are not one of those men. You have never been one of those men. So you keep your crossbow, and you sleep with it beside you, and you do not pray for forgiveness because you are not sorry. The Pope's decree does accomplish one thing, though perhaps not what he intended. It marks the crossbow as important. It singles it out as a weapon worthy of fear, worthy of divine prohibition. And in doing so, it makes men want it more. There is a psychology to banning something. It transforms the thing from a tool into a symbol, from a means to an end into an end itself. The crossbow becomes synonymous with defiance, with the rejection of the old order, with the quiet rebellion of men who have been told their entire lives that they do not matter, that their opinions are worthless, that their role is to obey and suffer and die in fields that belong to someone else. When you hold a crossbow now, after the ban, you are not just holding a weapon. You are holding a middle finger raised to heaven, a rejection of the idea that your betters know what is best for you. The Church has made the crossbow holy in its own way, not sacred, but significant, touched by the attention of power, marked as dangerous not just to bodies but to the social order itself. And that makes it irresistible. You are standing in the rain at Cressy, the year 1346, and you are about to die. Not you specifically, though perhaps you, too, but the idea of you, the mercenary Genoese crossbowman hired by the French crown to break the English line. You have been marching all day, and your bowstring is wet. This matters more than you know. The English longbowmen across the field have kept theirs dry, coiled beneath their shirts, and now they string them with practiced ease. You raise your crossbow, crank the windlass, feel the ache in your shoulders as the string locks into place. You fire. The bolt arcs, falls short, and before you can reload, the sky darkens. Not with clouds, but with arrows. Thousands of them. They fall like rain, like God's own judgment, and you realize, too late, that speed matters more than power. The longbow is faster. Lighter. Deadlier in the hands of men who have trained since boyhood. You are cut down, and the French cavalry tramples you as they charge forward, desperate and doomed. The crossbow is not obsolete, it will endure, evolve, become the backbone of siege warfare and urban defense, but here, in this churned and blood-soaked mud, it is outclassed. The weapon that terrified knights is humbled by a simpler, older cruelty. The mud is cold. You did not expect that. You thought dying would be hot, full of pain and fire, but instead it is cold and wet and the rain keeps falling. Above you, the French knights ride past, their horses' hooves splashing mud into your face, and you realize they do not even see you. You are already gone, already forgotten, just another body in a field full of bodies. The English arrows keep coming. You can hear them, a sound like wind through trees, and then the wet thud as they find flesh. Someone screams. It might be you. It is hard to tell. Your hands are still gripping the crossbow, though you cannot feel them anymore. It is a good weapon, you think, as the light begins to fade. It is just not fast enough. Not here. Not against men who have been training with longbows since they could walk, men who can lose 12 arrows in the time it takes you to reload once. The French will lose this battle. You know this now, lying in the mud, watching the sky turn dark with English arrows. They will lose because they did not understand that war is not about honor or courage or the glory of the charge. War is about killing the other side faster than they can kill you. And today, the English are faster. Your commander made mistakes. You know this even as you die. He pushed you forward too soon, tired from the march, your equipment wet, your morale already broken by days of poor planning and worse leadership. The French nobles do not understand soldiers like you. They hired you because Genoese crossbowmen have a reputation, because your city-state has turned the crossbow into an art form, a science, a source of pride and profit. But they treat you like servants, like tools to be used and discarded, and they wonder why you do not fight with the fervor of men defending their homeland. This is not your homeland. This is a muddy field in France, and you are dying for a king whose language you barely speak, in a war whose causes you do not understand. The crossbow in your hands is worth more than your life, and everyone knows it. When you fall, someone will take it from your corpse, clean it, use it again. Weapons are precious. Men are cheap. That is the lesson of Crécy. That is the lesson of every battle ever fought. The English are not better men. They are just better organized. Their longbowmen have been training together for years, drilling in coordination, learning to loose arrows in volleys that turn the sky black. They understand something fundamental about warfare that the French nobles, with their obsession with individual glory and knightly virtue, have forgotten or never learned, that organized masses of common men, properly trained and equipped, can break armies led by heroes. The longbow is not a better weapon than the crossbow in terms of pure power or penetration. But it is faster, and in this moment, on this field, speed is everything. The English loose, reload, loose again, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat, and you and your fellow Genoese cannot match it. You are dying because your weapon is too slow, because your commanders are too arrogant, because war has become a matter of industrial efficiency and no one told you. The world is changing, and you are caught in the middle of that change, crushed between the old way of doing things and the new, neither of which cares whether you live or die. You are no longer on the battlefield. You are inside the walls now, standing on a parapet slick with morning dew, watching the enemy camp spread like a sickness across the valley below. This is a siege, and time moves differently here. Days blur into weeks. Hunger becomes a companion. The crossbow is your only comfort. It sits beside you, cocked and ready, a bolt resting in the groove. Unlike the longbow, it does not require constant tension, constant readiness. You can set it down, wait, pick it up when the enemy moves. This is the crossbow's genius in siege warfare, patience. You watch a man below, carrying water, unaware. You aim. You fire. He falls. No drama. No grand clash of armies. Just a body in the dirt and the knowledge that their supplies are now one man lighter. This is how castles fall, not in glorious assaults, but in slow, grinding attrition. The crossbow becomes the weapon of murder holes, arrow slits, the tight corridors where a single defender can hold a staircase against a dozen attackers. It is the weapon of paranoia, of waiting, of the cold certainty that the walls will not hold forever, but perhaps they will hold long enough. And when they do fall, when the gates splinter and the enemy pours in, you will still have your crossbow, and you will make them pay for every step. The man you killed was young. You could see that, even from this distance. He had not yet learned to keep his head down, to move quickly from cover to cover, to understand that in a siege, every moment outside the shelter of walls is a moment borrowed from death. Now he has learned, and it has cost him everything. You feel nothing. That is the strangest part. You thought you would feel something, guilt, perhaps, or satisfaction, or at least the small thrill of a job well done. But there is nothing. Just the cold stone beneath your feet and the weight of the crossbow in your hands and the knowledge that tomorrow, or the day after that, you will do this again. The siege drags on. Food runs low. The bread is moldy, the water tastes of rust, and the rats are getting bolder. You eat them when you can catch them, roasting them over small fires that you pray the enemy cannot see. The crossbow sits beside you through all of it, patient and ready, waiting for the next target. It does not judge you. It does not care that you are hungry or tired or afraid. It simply is, and in a world that is falling apart around you, that is oddly comforting. The castle is dying. You can feel it in the walls, in the way the stones seem to sag under their own weight, in the cracks that spider across the mortar. The enemy has been hurling stones from trebuchets for weeks now, great boulders that crash against the fortifications with a sound like thunder. Each impact sends tremors through your bones, reminds you that stone, no matter how thick, no matter how carefully laid, is not eternal. Nothing is eternal. The defenders are dying too, slowly, from starvation and disease and the occasional successful assault. The latrines overflow. The smell is beyond description. Men shit where they stand because leaving your post might mean missing the enemy's approach, and that might mean death for everyone. You have learned to sleep standing up, the crossbow cradled in your arms like a child, because lying down means vulnerability, means precious seconds lost if the alarm sounds. You have learned to see in the dark, to distinguish between the movement of wind-blown cloth and the movement of men climbing ladders. You have learned things you never wanted to know, and you will carry them with you until you die, which will probably be soon. The nights are the worst. During the day, you can see the enemy, count their tents, watch their movements, feel like you have some measure of control over your fate. At night, the valley below becomes a carpet of campfires, thousands of small lights that mock you with their warmth and their numbers. You are outnumbered. You have always been outnumbered. The only question is whether the enemy's patience will outlast your supplies. Mathematics, cold and pitiless, will decide who lives and who dies. You do the calculations in your head during the long watches, counting sacks of grain, estimating how many men fall ill each day, trying to determine the exact day when staying becomes more dangerous than surrendering. But surrender is not really an option, not for you. You know what happens to mercenaries who surrender. You have seen the bodies, the elaborate cruelties inflicted on men who dared to sell their swords to the wrong side. So you stay, and you wait, and you fire your crossbow at men carrying water, and you pretend that this is strategy, that this matters, that you are doing something more than prolonging the inevitable. The crossbow is perfect for this kind of warfare. The tedious, grinding, unglamorous warfare of sieges. In an open battle, its slow reload is a weakness. Here, where you might wait hours for a single shot, it is an advantage. You can keep it cocked and ready, propped against the parapet, while you eat your moldy bread and contemplate your choices. When the target appears, and eventually, one always does, because the enemy grows careless, grows bored, grows convinced that you are too weak or too hungry to be dangerous, you simply pick up the weapon, aim with the careful deliberation of a craftsman, and fire. The bolt flies true more often than not, because you have had weeks to learn the distances, the wind patterns, the way the morning sun creates glare that can blind a man to the danger above him. You have become an expert in murder, a specialist in the art of the patient kill. It is not glorious. It will earn you no songs, no place in the histories. But it is effective, and in a siege, effectiveness is the only virtue that matters. The crossbow does not end the Middle Ages, but it helps. It chips away at the myth of the invincible knight, the sacred hierarchy of blood and breeding. It is the weapon of pragmatism, of men who cannot afford to wait for honor. It evolves, into the arbalest, the windlass, the crane quin, each iteration more powerful, more mechanical, until it becomes something almost industrial. And then, in time, it fades. Not because it fails, but because something worse arrives. Gunpowder. The arquebus. The musket. Weapons so loud, so brutal, so utterly indifferent to skill or courage, that the crossbow seems almost quaint in comparison. But the idea remains. The idea that a peasant can kill a king. That distance and leverage matter more than strength. That the tools of war will always, eventually, betray the powerful and empower the desperate. You are long dead now, whoever you were, footman or knight or mercenary. Your bones are dust, your name unremembered. But the crossbow endures in museums, in memory, in the cold knowledge that once, for a few blood-soaked centuries, the world learned that power is not inherited, it is held at the end of a string, drawn tight, waiting for the moment to release. And when it does, nothing is ever the same. The museums will preserve them, these crossbows, behind glass and careful labels. They will be cleaned and oiled and rendered safe, turned into artifacts, into lessons, into things that schoolchildren stare at for a moment before moving on to something more interesting. But you remember what they were. You remember the weight of them, the cold metal and rough wood, the way the string cut into your fingers as you cranked it back. You remember the sound they made when they fired, not loud but final, a mechanical snap that said this is done, this cannot be undone. You remember the faces of the men you killed with them, or rather, you remember not remembering their faces, because you were too far away to see them as human. That was the gift of the crossbow. That was its curse. It let you kill from a distance, let you end a life without having to look into the eyes of the person you were ending. It made murder easy. And easy murder, it turned out, was exactly what the world needed to tear itself apart and rebuild into something new. The evolution of the crossbow tells a story about humanity that we would prefer not to hear. We like to think that we progress, that we become more civilized, more humane, more careful with life. But the history of weapons tells a different story. It tells the story of our endless ingenuity in finding new ways to kill each other from greater distances with less personal risk. The crossbow was a step in that direction. The gun was another. The bomb, the missile, the drone, each iteration taking us further from the messy, intimate violence of swords and spears, each allowing us to kill without witnessing, without feeling, without the inconvenient humanity that comes from seeing the light go out in another person's eyes. The crossbow started this. Not alone, certainly. But it planted the seed of an idea, that technology could separate the killer from the killed, could transform murder into something mechanical, something that did not require hatred or even awareness of the person you were ending. Just aim. Pull the trigger. Move on to the next target. Efficiency. That is what we have been refining for centuries. Not the morality of killing, but the efficiency of it. The nobles hated it because it made them vulnerable. The church hated it because it made peasants dangerous. And yet, everyone used it, because in the end, survival matters more than principle. That is the lesson of the crossbow. Not that technology changes the world, though it does. Not that power can be democratized, though it can. The lesson is simpler, darker, more tired than that. The lesson is that when it comes down to it, when the walls are crumbling and the enemy is at the gate and the choice is between death and using the weapon you have been told is sinful, you will use the weapon. You will crank the string and load the bolt and pull the trigger, and you will tell yourself that you had no choice, that survival is not a sin, that God, if He is watching, will understand. And maybe He will. Or maybe He will not. Either way, the bolt flies, the man falls, and the world keeps turning, indifferent and cold. There is a moment, after you fire the crossbow, when time seems to slow. The bolt is in the air, following the arc of physics and trajectory and all the invisible forces that govern movement. You watch it fly, this small piece of wood and metal, carrying death across the space between you and another human being. In that moment, you think about choices. About the chain of decisions that led you here, to this wall, with this weapon in your hands, aiming at a man whose only crime is wearing the wrong lord's colors. You think about the craftsman who carved the stock, the fletcher who shaped the bolt, the sergeant who put the weapon in your hands and told you to kill. You think about the man you are about to kill, about whether he has a wife, children, a mother who will weep when the news arrives. And then the moment passes. The bolt strikes. The man falls. And you realize that all those thoughts, all that philosophical meandering, meant nothing. Changed nothing. You pulled the trigger because that is what you do. That is what soldiers do. That is what the crossbow allows you to do without the messy complications of conscience. You think about the craftsman sometimes, in the moments before sleep, when the past feels closer than the present. The man in the scriptorium, carving the stock with patient hands, not knowing that he is building the future. You wonder if he understood what he was making, if he grasped the implications of this simple, brutal tool. Probably not. Probably he was just trying to survive, to earn his bread, to make it through another winter. That is what most of history is, you have learned. Not grand visions or noble causes, but people trying to survive, making tools and weapons and compromises, doing what they have to do to see another sunrise. The crossbow was one of those compromises. A weapon for men who could not afford honor, who needed to kill quickly and from a distance, who understood that the world was not fair and never would be. It was a weapon of realism, of cold pragmatism, of the understanding that power does not care about your birth or your training or your God. Power cares about results. And the results were undeniable. Knights fell. Castles crumbled. The old order, built on the idea that violence was the exclusive domain of the nobility, began to crack. It did not happen overnight. It never does. Change is slow, grinding, often invisible until it is too late to stop. But the crossbow was part of it, a small thread in the larger unraveling of the medieval world. It taught peasants that they could fight back, that they could kill the men who oppressed them, that the gap between lord and serf was not as wide as they had been told. It taught lords to fear, to build thicker walls, to hire more soldiers, to understand that their position was not guaranteed by God but maintained by force, and that force could be met with force. It was a lesson in vulnerability. And once learned, it could not be unlearned. The irony is that the crossbow, for all its revolutionary potential, did not lead to peasant uprisings or the overthrow of the feudal system. It should have, by all logic. If you give the oppressed a weapon that can kill their oppressors, surely they will use it. But history is not logical. History is a tangle of fear and inertia and 1,000 small calculations that keep people in their place even when they have the means to break free. The peasants with crossbows mostly used them to fight other peasants, in wars declared by lords, for causes they did not understand. The weapon that could have liberated them became just another tool of their oppression, another way for the powerful to extract violence from the powerless. That is the real tragedy of the crossbow. Not that it failed to change the world, but that it changed the world in all the wrong ways. It made war more efficient, more deadly, more democratic in its distribution of suffering. But it did not make war less frequent. It did not make lords less cruel. It did not, in the end, make anyone free. You are tired now. The weight of centuries presses down on you, the accumulated exhaustion of every footman who ever cranked a crossbow, every knight who ever fell to a peasant's bolt, every lord who ever realized that his walls would not hold, every pope who ever tried to ban a weapon and failed. History is heavy. It is made of bodies and broken promises and tools that were meant to protect but ended up destroying. The crossbow is one of those tools. Simple. Brutal. Effective. And in its simplicity, its brutality, its effectiveness, it contains a truth that we would rather not face, that the world is not fair, that power is not sacred, that the distance between civilization and chaos is a string drawn tight, waiting for someone to pull the trigger. The crossbow teaches us something uncomfortable about ourselves, about the species we belong to, about the nature of progress. We want to believe that we are improving, that each generation learns from the mistakes of the last, that the arc of history bends toward justice. But the crossbow reminds us that the arc of history mostly bends toward more efficient killing. That is what we are good at. That is what we have always been good at. Not love, not art, not philosophy, though we dabble in those too, but the technical refinement of violence. From the sharpened stick to the crossbow to the gun to the bomb, we have spent our collective genius on the problem of how to end each other more quickly, more reliably, from greater distances. The crossbow was just one step in that long, bloody march. Not the first. Not the last. Just another innovation in the art of making death mechanical. And yet, for all its darkness, there is something almost beautiful about the crossbow. The elegance of its mechanism, the way it translates human effort into lethal force through leverage and tension. The craftsmanship required to carve the stock just so, to shape the prod to store maximum energy, to create a trigger mechanism reliable enough to bet your life on. It is a machine, one of the first truly mechanical weapons, and it represents a moment when humans began to understand that the world operates according to principles that can be measured, calculated, exploited. The crossbow is a bridge between the ancient world of muscle and instinct and the modern world of engineering and industry. It is a weapon, yes, and it caused untold suffering. But it is also a testament to human ingenuity, to our ability to see a problem, in this case, how do I kill that man over there, and solve it with elegance and efficiency. That this particular application of ingenuity is so dark, so focused on death, tells us something about our priorities. But it does not diminish the achievement. The crossbow works. And in a world defined by violence, that is all that matters. The string of a crossbow, when drawn, holds enormous potential energy. Hundreds of pounds of force, compressed into a few inches of travel, waiting to be released. It is potential made physical, possibility made tangible. And when you pull the trigger, all that potential converts instantly into kinetic energy, into the bolt flying through the air, into the impact that ends a life or changes a battle or alters the course of history in ways too small to measure but too significant to ignore. Every crossbow bolt ever fired was a tiny pivot point, a moment when the world could have gone one way or another. The man lives or dies. The battle is won or lost. The castle holds or falls. And the sum of all those tiny moments, all those individual bolts loosed from all those anonymous hands, adds up to the sweep of history, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the slow grinding transformation of the world from what it was to what it became. You are part of that. You, the footman, the nobody, the man with calloused hands and a wet bowstring and no name that anyone will remember. You are history. Not the history they write in books, but the history that actually happens, the history made by common people doing uncommon violence in the name of lords they have never met. So sleep now, if you can. Dream of monastic scriptoriums and wet bowstrings, of nights falling in the mud and castles that held just long enough. Dream of a weapon that changed the world not through glory or honor, but through cold, mechanical efficiency. Dream of the men who held it, anonymous and forgotten, who cranked the string and pulled the trigger and made history without ever knowing their names would be lost. They are dust now, all of them, but the crossbow remains. In museums. In memory. In the knowledge that once, for a few blood-soaked centuries, the world learned a lesson it has never forgotten, that power is not inherited, it is held at the end of a string, drawn tight, waiting for the moment to release. And when it does, when the bolt flies and the night falls and the old order cracks, nothing is ever the same. Nothing can ever be the same. The world has learned to kill efficiently, and that knowledge, once gained, cannot be surrendered. It can only be refined, improved, made more terrible. The crossbow was the beginning. We are still living the ending. We are still pulling the trigger, still watching the bolt fly, still telling ourselves that we had no choice, that survival demanded it, that this, too, shall pass. But it never passes. It accumulates. History is not a river that washes things away. It is a sediment, layer upon layer of violence and compromise and the quiet desperation of people trying to live through times that do not care whether they live or die. The crossbow is buried in that sediment now, deep down, almost forgotten. But it is still there. Still waiting. Still teaching its dark lesson to anyone willing to dig deep enough to find it. That power is mechanical. That death is efficient. That the distance between you and the person you are killing is the only mercy the world offers, and it is not much of a mercy at all.